When being a stepfather means taking on more than love, a journey of pain and overcoming. I never imagined I'd be writing something like this, speaking of a pain that seemed impossible to bear. My name is Rubens. I'm 42 years old, and I've lived through moments that made me question everything I believed about family, authority, and love. I grew up thinking that being a father was just a matter of being present, but I learned the hard way that not everyone understands this the same way. For years, I've found myself caring for Larissa, my wife Isabella's daughter, since she was 5. I entered her life early, when Marcos, her biological father, disappeared or simply refused to take responsibility. I didn't want to be a hero, nor a substitute. I wanted to be someone reliable, someone who would protect and help her, but the responsibility became overwhelming over time. I paid for clothes, doctor's appointments, picked her up from school, participated in her life as if it were my duty. And partly I wanted it to be my right too. But what I didn't expect was that all my dedication, all my concern, would be questioned by those who should have trusted me. The turning point came on a seemingly ordinary day that changed my perspective forever. Larissa, my daughter, came to me believing she was pregnant. At that moment, I felt fear, despair, and a silent rage that burned inside. She was 16, but she felt too grown up for the consequences of her choices. And I, even though I wasn't, the biological father, had to assume the role no one else wanted, protecting and setting boundaries. I felt betrayed, disrespected, and manipulated because Isabella always said I had no authority over anything related to her. And yet, there I was, trying to contain a situation that seemed beyond my control, trying to figure out how to support Larissa without destroying the only trust we had. It was a confusing mix of love and frustration, of care and emotional exhaustion that left me feeling grounded. I felt angry at Marcos too. After years of being out of Larissa's life, he reappeared just to complicate things. He had no responsibility whatsoever, yet he wanted to dictate rules, judge choices, and interfere in what had been my care for over a decade. I felt alone, at the mercy of other people's decisions and conflicting feelings. Frustration and exhaustion took over, but I realized this was the point where I needed to be firm for myself and for Larissa. I couldn't let myself be brought down by other people's egos, nor by Isabella's rejection, who continued to deny my authority. It was a moment of painful clarity. Either I set limits, or the entire family would fall apart emotionally. As Larissa cried and begged for support, I felt a strength I didn't know I had. It was fear, anger, but also determination. I knew that if we gave in to her manipulation and impulsiveness, we would be creating more problems for the future. I decided to limit my financial involvement, establish clear rules, and for the first time communicate to Isabella that our relationship as a couple could not continue as it was. Feeling like I had to act against the one I loved and protect the one I loved was overwhelming, but also liberating in a strange way. It was the first step in reconnecting with myself and my own authority. In the midst of all this, I felt shame and exhaustion. Shame at realizing that, despite years of dedication, my presence and effort were never fully recognized. Exhausted at carrying responsibilities that weren't mine, at trying to create boundaries where no one else saw them as necessary. But at the same time, I realized that pain was my ally. It taught me that true strength doesn't come from recognition, but from consistency, from the courage to face what is difficult, even without support. That day, I realized I was beginning to free myself from other people's expectations, and for the first time, embracing my role without apology. That same day, the feeling of being on an emotional battlefield kept me from breathing properly. Larissa looked at me with swollen eyes, trying to understand where the line between love and discipline lay. I felt everything at once. Fear of what could happen if I didn't intervene, anger at seeing such hasty choices, and a weariness that seemed to permeate my entire body. It was strange to realize that even as the stepfather, I had a bond no one could replace. That day showed me that authority isn't a matter of blood, but of presence, firmness, and responsibility. I needed to assert myself, even if it meant temporarily distancing myself from the one I loved, because to let everything loose was to allow destruction to unfold before my eyes. As I tried to organize my thoughts, I realized that part of the pain stemmed from feeling invisible. 11 years of marriage, years of caring for Larissa, and yet Isabella insisted I couldn't interfere. It was a direct blow to the chest. I felt anger, sadness, and helplessness, but at the same time, something I hadn't expected emerged: clarity. I understood that to survive emotionally and not lose myself in frustration, I needed to set clear boundaries, even if it generated conflict. That day became a turning point because it was the first time I spoke seriously about rules, limits, and responsibilities, without fear of rejection or criticism. My frustration reached another level when I realized Larissa was trying to manipulate me with tears and desperate pleas, wanting to use the money and my involvement to escape the consequences. Deep down, I understood she was young and that impulsiveness was part of growing up. But I couldn't give in. I felt a mixture of guilt and determination. Guilt for being too strict and determination for knowing it was necessary. It was painful, but also empowering. For the first time, I understood that protecting someone doesn't always mean pleasing them, and that discipline is sometimes more an act of love than indulgence. When Marcos appeared, trying to interfere, my anger exploded, but I had to control myself. I was afraid of losing my temper and saying something that could make things worse, but I also knew I needed to be firm. I realized that adulthood requires making difficult decisions and confronting people who don't share our values. It was a painful learning experience. Not everyone will appreciate your efforts or recognize your role, and the responsibility to maintain stability, even when no one cooperates, falls on you. This feeling was frightening, but it also gave me a sense of empowerment I'd never experienced before. At the end of the day, after so many arguments, tears, and internal confrontations, I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I realized that what I was doing was right, even if no one else saw it that way. I couldn't change other people's behavior, but I could choose how to react to it. For the first time, I felt like I was regaining some control over my life, that my strength didn't come from being loved or recognized, but from being firm, consistent, and true to myself. It was at that moment that I began to understand that overcoming pain isn't about eliminating it, but about learning to live with it and act despite it. That same day, after making firm decisions, I began to realize the true weight of the choices I'd made. Feeling the need to distance myself emotionally, limit my financial involvement, and establish clear rules felt like cutting off a piece of myself. Pain, anger, and fear mingled in every thought. I felt responsible for Larissa, even though I knew she didn't see me as a father, and this left me in constant conflict. But I also felt something new: resilience. For the first time, I realized that my strength didn't depend on Isabella's approval or Marcos's absence. I had the ability to face chaos and impose order, even when it seemed all the winds were blowing against me. As I reflected, I realized how emotionally exhausted I was. 11 years of dedication, nights awake thinking about Larissa's future, difficult decisions made alone, and everything seemed invisible to those who should have recognized my efforts. The mixture of frustration and exhaustion was physical, as if my entire body carried the weight of responsibilities no one else wanted to shoulder. But at the same time, a clarity dawned on me like I'd never felt before. If I didn't take a stand now, all my previous efforts would be in vain. I needed to act decisively, even if it meant facing rejection, accusations, and resentment. It was the moment I understood that overcoming challenges required courage to step forward, even without guarantees of recognition or reciprocity. The confrontation with Larissa was painful. She was confused, scared, and angry. She tried to use my care and support as bargaining chips, seeking to escape the consequences of her choices. Seeing her defiance and manipulation filled me with a mixture of anger, sadness, and concern. I felt that if we gave in, we would be teaching her that impulsive choices have no limits. It was difficult to remain calm, breathe, and speak firmly. Every word I said hurt, but it was also an essential step in showing that, despite pain and failures, limits exist and must be respected. This balance between love and discipline, though exhausting, was my first concrete lesson in true authority. When Isabella got involved, saying I had no rights, I felt a rage that threatened to explode, but in that very moment I realized that giving in would mean giving up everything I'd built. I took a deep breath and stood my ground. The feeling of isolation was strong, as if I were alone fighting against everyone, but I realized that paradoxically, it strengthened me. I learned that overcoming adversity isn't about receiving support. It's about maintaining clarity and coherence even when no one believes in you. Each confrontation, each difficult decision was shaping me, making me stronger, more aware, and more resilient. At the end of the day, while everything seemed like a whirlwind, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I realized that my strength came from my commitment to responsibility, not from acknowledged love. Feeling pain and still acting was liberating. For the first time, I felt I could face any consequences, and that, even without being a biological father, my presence, discipline, and firmness could give Larissa the structure she needed, even if it was difficult for her to accept. That day marked the beginning of a transformation that showed me that being firm and fair is sometimes the only way to survive emotionally. In the days that followed, I felt the consequences of what I had decided on that momentous day. The tension with Larissa and Isabella increased, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to situations, I was acting with purpose, with clear boundaries and a conviction that empowered me. I felt fear, of course, but also a clarity that made me realize that even if everyone tried to tear me down, my stance was necessary. I felt I could finally look in the mirror and acknowledge that I was doing the right thing, even if it was painful. The confrontation with Marcos brought another level of challenge. He hadn't been around for years and suddenly reappeared, trying to dictate rules and interfere in decisions that weren't his. I felt anger, indignation, but also compassion. Strange as it seemed, I understood that some people don't change and that the responsibility to maintain boundaries and protect those who depend on you is solely yours. I couldn't expect others to act correctly or to appreciate my efforts. This realization was a shock, but also a turning point. I began to realize that my overcoming depended on me, not on anyone else's approval. Larissa continued to test her limits. I tried to understand her actions, her fear and impulsiveness, but I also had to be firm. Every tear, every manipulation was a reminder that life offers no shortcuts. I felt pain at seeing her lose herself, fear of what might happen, but also determination. The balance between empathy and discipline was the hardest lesson of that period. I learned that caring for someone doesn't mean being complicit in mistakes, but facing reality, even when it hurts, to teach responsibility and consequences. Isabella, in turn, didn't understand my position. She kept reinforcing that I wasn't a father and that I had no right to make decisions involving Larissa. I felt frustrated and lonely, but I also strengthened my sense of justice. It was in this conflict that I understood the value of consistency. Even without recognition, without support, and in the face of resistance from those I loved, I needed to remain firm. The emotional pain I felt made me more resilient, clearer about my limits and what I was willing to allow. By the end of that day, I realized my transformation had truly begun. I was no longer reacting. I was leading, even if I had to lead alone. The feeling was strange, a mixture of fear, relief, and strength. For the first time, I felt that my authority, though denied by others, had validity and purpose. Overcoming didn't mean eliminating the pain, but learning to face it and act with clarity and firmness. And that day, I understood that even without being a biological father, I could be the structure my family needed, even if they were slow to recognize it. As the hours passed and the tension of that day wore on, I began to realize that something inside me had permanently changed. The clarity I felt about my limits and responsibilities brought a sense of relief I never could have imagined. I realized that even in the face of Larissa's resistance, Isabella's denial, and Marcos's disregard, I could act justly and firmly. The emotional exhaustion was still present, but now there was room for hope. For the first time, I felt I no longer needed to lose myself trying to please or be accepted. My priority was Larissa's safety and growth, and this gave me the strength to carry on. As I reflected, I realized that the anger and fear, though intense, had transformed into clarity and resilience. I still felt sadness for what I couldn't control, frustration over Larissa's poor decisions, and pain over the broken relationship with Isabella. But I also had strength. I learned that overcoming doesn't mean everything is resolved immediately. It means learning to stand up and act correctly, even if others resist or don't recognize it. The knowledge that I could be firm and fair, even as just a stepfather, was liberating. Reality showed me that responsibility isn't just a word. It's action, presence, and consistency, even when no one sees or appreciates it. Larissa would continue to make mistakes, but now I knew I could guide her, even reluctantly, so she could learn about limits and consequences. Overcoming, in this sense, isn't about eliminating pain or avoiding conflict, but about having the courage to remain firm and consistent, even when the situation is emotionally overwhelming. I learned that by setting limits, I was showing love in a real, concrete way, even when it hurt. Looking back on that day and realizing everything I'd faced made me feel proud of myself. Exhaustion, anger, fear, and frustration had been transformed into clarity, strength, and purpose. I realized that my presence and discipline, even if unacknowledged, could make a difference in Larissa's life. This awareness gave me peace. I felt that, although the journey was still long and painful at times, I had achieved something essential: the ability to act correctly, even against resistance and criticism, and this made me stronger. Today, when I think about that day, I feel a mixture of pain and pride. I learned that love and discipline can coexist, even when no one understands or acknowledges them. I discovered that being firm, consistent, and fair is a form of deep and lasting care. I still deal with the consequences of Larissa's choices, but now with clarity, patience, and strength. That day was the turning point. It was when I realized that overcoming pain isn't the absence of pain, but the ability to act despite it, and that even without being a biological father, I could be the structure my family needed. Today, I breathe easier, knowing I did the right thing and remain strong, despite everything.